He was just a kid sketching under a tree, but 10 minutes later, he was nearly arrested, accused, and branded a threat. What happened next shook the entire city and exposed a truth too big to ignore. This story will make you question everything about justice, silence, and who gets to feel safe in public spaces. Stay until the end, because the final moment will change how you see your role in the world. Like this video, hit subscribe, and be part of the change that starts with truth. Elijah Brooks loved quiet places. He wasn't the kind of kid who needed noise or crowds to feel alive. At just 13, he already understood the value of stillness. That's why the old willow tree at the edge of Riverview Park had become his favorite spot. It stood a little away from the playground and the walking trails, its drooping branches forming a soft green curtain that made the world outside feel miles away. On that afternoon, the sunlight filtered through the leaves just right, casting soft patterns on the grass and across the open pages of his sketchbook. Elijah leaned against the thick trunk, his legs folded beneath him, completely at peace as he alternated between sketching futuristic cities and reading his favorite sci-fi novel. His glasses slipped slightly down his nose, but he didn't mind. This was his world, quiet and full of imagination, far from the noise of the city and the pressures of being seen as something he wasn't. He wore a navy hoodie, one his mom had given him last Christmas, and a pair of jeans that had a small tear near the knee from an old bike fall. Nothing about him stood out. No flashy clothes, no loud music, no trouble. Just a kid enjoying the calm of a sunny afternoon. But peace, as Elijah would learn, sometimes makes other people uncomfortable. Especially when it comes wrapped in brown skin and quiet confidence. Across the park, Susan Aldridge stood stiffly near a row of benches, holding a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. She wasn't here for the park's serenity. Her eyes scanned the area with a kind of intensity that didn't match the calmness around her. She spotted Elijah under the tree and narrowed her gaze. Something about how still he was, how he didn't look around nervously or try to make himself small, unsettled her. He didn't smile at strangers. He didn't seem afraid. And to someone like Susan, who'd spent her life expecting certain behaviors from certain people, that quiet self-possession felt like a challenge. Elijah noticed her glancing his way but didn't think much of it. People looked sometimes, and most of the time it didn't mean anything. He refocused on the page, adding detail to the skyline he was building. Twin suns hovering over a floating city, towers shaped like tree trunks, bridges made of light. It was the kind of world he wished existed, one where people weren't so quick to judge what they didn't understand. But Susan didn't look away. She watched him like she was waiting for something to happen, like she already had a story about him in her head and was just searching for the scene to match it. To her, a black boy sitting alone, not playing, not smiling, not explaining himself, meant something was off. She started walking toward him, coffee cup forgotten on the bench. Elijah didn't see her approach at first. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves and flipping a page in his notebook. He reached to turn it back when he heard footsteps close by. At first, he thought she might be lost or just curious. Maybe she wanted directions or had a question about what he was drawing. That happened sometimes, and he never minded. But there was something off in the way she stood, the tightness of her posture, the way her arms crossed in front of her as if bracing for something. Elijah glanced up and gave a small polite nod, hoping that would be enough. But she didn't smile. She just stared, eyes scanning him like he was a puzzle she didn't trust. He felt a strange flutter in his chest, a little warning bell that maybe this wasn't just a passing interaction. Maybe this quiet afternoon was about to become something else entirely. Susan Aldridge didn't waste much time pretending she was just being neighborly. Her tone shifted quickly, going from polite to probing, like she was trying to dig for something that wasn't there. Elijah answered her questions calmly, even though they made less and less sense. She asked if he came to the park often, if he knew the group of boys she'd seen earlier near the basketball courts. He didn't. He told her he liked the quiet, liked to draw, liked to read. But instead of satisfying her curiosity, his answers only seemed to make her more suspicious. She leaned in closer, her eyes darting around as if expecting someone to jump out from behind the bushes. Elijah felt it, the tension tightening in the space between them. The way she kept looking around, like he couldn't possibly be alone and peaceful without some kind of hidden motive. Then came the question about his phone. She pointed at it in his lap like it was a weapon, not a scratched-up model his mom had saved up to buy him on his last birthday. Her voice had an edge now. She wanted to know where he got it, how much it cost, whether it really belonged to him. Elijah held it up, open in his hand, not wanting to seem like he had anything to hide. He told her it was a gift from his mom, hoping that would end it. But it didn't. The doubt in her eyes only deepened. Susan's voice got louder, carrying across the open space of the park. A couple of heads turned, people walking dogs, a man pushing a stroller, but they didn't come closer. Not yet. Elijah sat a little straighter, confused and beginning to feel cornered. Susan was saying things that didn't make sense. That boys like him sometimes got caught up in the wrong things. That people needed to stay alert these days. That she had a responsibility to say something if she saw something that didn't feel right. Elijah didn't know how to respond to that. He was doing what he always did, sketching, reading, waiting for his mom. What exactly didn't feel right? His heart started beating faster. He glanced around, hoping someone would make eye contact and offer him a little reassurance, maybe step in and ask what was going on. But no one did. The people who had looked now looked away. Susan reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She announced that she was going to call someone, that she didn't feel safe. Her voice rose as she stepped back, speaking loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. She said Elijah was acting defensive. She said he might be hiding something. Said she had to protect the other children in the park. Elijah stood slowly, trying to explain, trying to ask her not to call anyone, that he was just waiting for his mom. But Susan wasn't listening. She was on the phone now, her words spilling out fast and dramatic. She said he might be armed. That he was getting aggressive. That she feared for her safety. Elijah felt the panic rise like a wave. He reached into his hoodie pocket to call his mother, desperate for help, for someone to talk to who would understand. But Susan saw the movement and snapped. In one swift, violent motion, she lunged forward and grabbed his wrist, trying to yank the phone out of his hand. It slipped and hit the ground hard, screen shattering on the pavement. Elijah gasped and bent to pick it up, but she shoved him back with both hands, knocking him off balance. His legs tangled beneath him and he stumbled, catching himself on the grass. His arm stung where her nails had scraped him, and his broken phone sat useless a few feet away. Before he could even stand up fully, she turned to the crowd and screamed that he had attacked her. That he had tried to take her phone. That he had a weapon. Her voice cracked with feigned terror, but it was loud and convincing. A few people began filming. Others just watched, unsure, their faces filled with that same familiar uncertainty. Who do we believe? Elijah's hands shook. He tried to speak, tried to explain. But the more he talked, the more her performance swallowed his voice. She cried, said he lunged at her, said he threatened her life. He looked around and felt his chest tighten. No one moved to help him. No one said stop. He was a kid in a park, but none of that mattered now. Not to her. Not to the crowd. He wasn't a boy under a tree anymore. He was a suspect. And for the first time, Elijah felt truly unsafe in the one place that had always brought him peace. The sirens cut through the park like a blade. What had once been an ordinary sunny afternoon now felt like a storm was rolling in. Fast, loud, and impossible to stop. Elijah stood frozen, still dazed from being shoved, staring at the broken pieces of his phone on the sidewalk. His heart thudded in his chest, each beat quick and shallow. He didn't know what to expect, but something inside him whispered that whatever came next wouldn't be fair. The police cruiser skidded slightly as it pulled onto the grass near the edge of the park, tires crunching dry leaves and loose gravel. Doors flung open. 2 officers stepped out. One of them, Officer Daniels, moved quickly, his steps sharp and direct, his hand already resting on the grip of his weapon. His face was tense, not in a way that showed concern, but with a kind of hardness that looked ready to confront something dangerous. The other officer, Harris, followed behind more slowly, his eyes scanning the scene, his shoulders slightly hunched like he wasn't fully sure what he was walking into. Daniels locked eyes on Elijah and marched straight toward him. Without asking a single question, he barked at Elijah to stay where he was. Elijah immediately raised his hands, palms open, instinctively trying to show he wasn't a threat. He tried to speak, to explain what had happened, to say he hadn't done anything wrong. But Daniels cut him off, waving his hand like the words didn't matter. His tone was sharp, almost angry, as if Elijah had already been tried and found guilty of something he didn't even understand. Just a few steps away, Susan Aldridge was now crying harder, her voice rising with every sentence. She pointed at Elijah with a trembling hand, her other hand pressed to her chest like she was barely holding herself together. She told the officers that Elijah had attacked her, that he'd been watching the kids in the park, that he might be carrying something dangerous. She claimed he got violent when she asked what he was doing, that he grabbed for her phone, and that she feared for her life. The crowd around them began to grow. People paused their walks, turned from the basketball courts, lowered their strollers to see what was happening. Some pulled out their phones. A few looked unsure, but no one spoke up. Elijah tried again, his voice shaking, to explain that she had attacked him first. That she took his phone. That she pushed him. But it felt like he was speaking underwater, his words slow, muffled, fading before they reached anyone who could help. Officer Harris stood off to the side, watching, his face unreadable. Something in his eyes flickered, maybe doubt, maybe discomfort, but he didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched. Daniels stepped in closer. His hand still hovered too close to his weapon. He asked Elijah if he had any weapons, any drugs, anything he shouldn't be carrying. Elijah shook his head quickly, panic rising in his throat. He tried to say he didn't, that he wasn't carrying anything at all. But Daniels wasn't listening. He told Elijah to turn around, to keep his hands where they could be seen. When Elijah flinched slightly, just a nervous, automatic movement, Daniels stiffened, his whole body tensing like he'd been waiting for an excuse to react. The tension in the air tightened like a rope pulled too far. The crowd started murmuring louder now. More phones were pointed in Elijah's direction. Everyone seemed to be recording, but no one was stepping forward. No one was saying, "Wait, maybe this isn't what it looks like." Elijah's breath caught in his throat. His arms were shaking. He could feel every eye on him, and he didn't know if they saw a scared kid or something else. Something dangerous, just because someone said so. Still, Officer Harris said nothing. He shifted his weight, glanced at Daniels, opened his mouth like he might say something, but closed it again. Whatever hesitation he felt, it wasn't strong enough to override his silence. Daniels, on the other hand, had no hesitation at all. He moved to grab Elijah's arm, and Elijah stepped back out of instinct, terrified and confused. That's when the officer shouted at him not to move, his voice booming across the park. Elijah froze in place, hands still up, trying not to cry, trying not to breathe too loud. And just like that, the moment spun further out of control. The peaceful afternoon was gone. The willow tree no longer felt like protection. Elijah wasn't a kid with a sketchbook anymore. He was someone they didn't see clearly, someone caught in a story written by fear and silence. Across the park, tucked beneath the shade of a sycamore tree, Janelle Cruz watched everything unfold. At first, she hadn't been paying close attention. She was just taking a break from her jog, sipping from a water bottle and scrolling through her messages. But something about the tone in the air, the sharpness of the woman's voice, the way the boy stood so still, pulled her eyes up. Janelle had seen enough in her life to recognize when something wasn't right, when fear was being dressed up as concern, and when the quietest person in the room was the one people should be listening to. She adjusted her phone, held it low but angled toward the scene. Her hands were steady, her breathing slow. She didn't want to draw attention to herself, but she also knew that sometimes being silent wasn't enough. Janelle had been here before, not this park, not this exact moment, but this story, this tension, this feeling of watching something unfair unravel in real time. It brought back memories she didn't want to remember but couldn't afford to forget. As she recorded, her phone captured everything. The way Susan had pointed. The way her voice kept climbing, one octave above the truth. The trembling hands that didn't shake until the police showed up. The boy's quiet pleas, barely audible but full of something raw and honest. And then, there was that glance, brief, subtle, but unmistakable. Susan's eyes flicked toward a tall white man standing just beyond the crowd. She gave him a tiny nod, quick and controlled. And he nodded back, like they'd rehearsed it. Like this was part of a plan. Janelle's stomach tightened. She zoomed in slightly, just enough to catch both faces in the frame. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't panic. It was performance. She kept filming, every second piling up into proof. Not just of what was happening, but of why it was happening. The setup. The story Susan was trying to sell. The way she was molding a scared, quiet boy into a threat simply because she had the confidence to raise her voice louder than his. When the police arrived, Janelle didn't stop filming. She saw the way the officer approached the boy, already on edge, already treating him like a suspect. She heard the orders, sharp and unnecessary, and she saw the other officer hesitate but say nothing. Her camera caught it all. The way Susan's cries got louder when she saw the uniforms, how she stumbled back theatrically, clutching her chest like she was being haunted. It was too much. Too perfect. And too familiar. Janelle kept her camera steady. She knew how quickly stories like this could be spun into something else. How even when people filmed, their videos got picked apart, their intentions questioned. But she also knew how powerful the truth could be when captured in the moment. The real kind of truth, not just facts, but tone, context, behavior, emotion. All of it was there, and she had it. As the scene continued to escalate, Janelle shifted slightly behind the tree, staying out of the spotlight but keeping her lens fixed on the people who thought no one was really watching. She recorded the moment when Susan screamed again, pointing to the boy's hoodie pocket, insisting he had something dangerous. She caught the fear on the boy's face as he tried to explain, his voice cracking under the weight of panic. She captured Officer Daniels' hand tightening around his weapon, the entire crowd holding their breath, and the second officer's uneasy glance that said more than words ever could. And through it all, Janelle kept filming, not just because she had a phone and knew how, but because she knew it mattered. The boy under that willow tree didn't have a voice anyone wanted to hear in that moment. But she did. Her lens became the eye that couldn't look away. Her footage became the witness that didn't waver. Later, when the video spread across phones and news feeds, when people started asking questions and demanding answers, it would be her quiet courage that made the difference. It would be the choice to stay steady, to press record, to tell the truth when no one else would. In that moment, Janelle Cruz wasn't just filming a scene. She was making sure the truth didn't disappear beneath someone else's lies. The black SUV pulled up fast and clean along the edge of the park, its tires crunching the gravel in a way that made people instinctively pause. Doors opened, and before anyone could process what was happening, Camille Brooks stepped out. Her heels hit the pavement with sharp precision, each step steady and full of purpose. She didn't look around for confirmation. She didn't hesitate. She walked directly into the center of the growing crowd, scanning faces until she found the one that mattered most, her son. Elijah saw her almost at the same moment. A mix of relief and disbelief washed over his face. For a split second, his knees nearly gave in. He had been standing so still for so long, trying not to move, not to seem threatening, not to make things worse. And now, just like that, his mother was here. Not just his mom, but the person with more power and voice than anyone in the park. Camille reached him quickly. Her eyes swept over his face, his posture, the small scratch on his arm, the shattered pieces of his phone. She didn't have to ask what had happened. She saw it written in the way people avoided her eyes, in the way the officer's stance shifted slightly when he realized who she was. Her son didn't need to explain. She already knew. She turned to Officer Daniels, standing too close to Elijah, still tense, still clutching the authority he had walked in with. Camille's voice, when it came, was calm, low, but absolutely firm. She asked what was going on, why her son was being treated like a criminal when he had been sitting under a tree with a book. The crowd quieted. Phones were already up, recording every word, every movement. Officer Daniels tried to explain. Something about a call, about a report from a concerned citizen. Camille cut through it all, not with shouting or anger, but with clarity. She reminded the officers that her son was a child. She pointed out that he had been alone, not approaching anyone, not doing anything illegal. She asked what threat, exactly, they had seen with their own eyes. Daniels stumbled. His voice faltered under the weight of her questions. His explanations didn't hold up in the open air of accountability. Officer Harris stood behind him, guilt written across his face, eyes darting toward Camille with a mix of regret and quiet recognition. Susan Aldridge, seeing the shift in energy, tried to reclaim the moment. She raised her voice again, insisting that she'd only been trying to protect the kids. That Elijah had looked suspicious. That she felt afraid. Camille turned her gaze to Susan slowly, without blinking, and the force of that stare alone was enough to hush the noise. She asked how a boy quietly drawing could be seen as a threat. She asked if Susan had felt afraid before or only after she realized she was wrong. The crowd started murmuring again, but this time the tone had changed. Doubt had crept in. Eyes that had once watched Elijah now looked at Susan with something colder. Camille stood tall, shielding her son with her presence, letting the truth settle on its own. She wasn't just defending her child. She was holding up a mirror to the entire scene, forcing everyone to see what had really happened. Not the story that was screamed the loudest, but the one that had quietly unraveled in plain sight. Elijah stood beside her, still shaken, but steadier now. He didn't have to speak. His mother was saying everything he couldn't. Camille made it clear that there would be consequences. That this moment wouldn't just disappear. And as she stood there, surrounded by silence, shame, and a few humbled officers, something shifted in the air. Power changed hands. The story changed course. People began to realize they hadn't just witnessed a misunderstanding. They had witnessed something much bigger. And it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Camille Brooks, the mayor of the city, wasn't going anywhere. And neither was the truth. By the time Camille Brooks and her son Elijah left the park that day, the videos had already started circulating. Janelle Cruz had uploaded the footage to a local community page, and within hours it was being reshared faster than anyone could track. Multiple angles started surfacing, clips from different bystanders, different perspectives, all showing the same painful truth. A quiet boy falsely accused, a woman weaponizing fear, and a police officer ready to escalate without question. The public response was swift and intense. Comments flooded social media platforms. News outlets picked up the story. Hashtags with Elijah's name began trending. People were outraged. Not just because of what happened to him, but because so many had seen it happen before in different ways, to different people. This time, though, the evidence was too clear. The boy was too young. The lies were too bold. And the mother, well, she was the mayor. Camille didn't go silent. She held a press conference within 24 hours, standing beside Elijah, her hand steady on his shoulder. She didn't make it about politics or public image. She made it about truth, about what every parent fears, and what too many children of color endure. She spoke with poise but didn't hide her anger. She called for an immediate investigation, not into her son, but into the officers involved and the woman whose accusations started it all. The city responded with mixed emotions. Most rallied around Elijah, praising his calm and courage. Many applauded Camille for standing her ground. But there were others, a smaller but vocal crowd, who questioned her motives. They accused her of using her position to intimidate the police, of turning a personal issue into a public one. Still, the truth had momentum, and the footage continued to speak for itself. Susan Aldridge, who once looked so sure of herself in that park, found herself at the center of a firestorm. Internet sleuths quickly uncovered her background, including her job at a high-profile real estate firm. Calls poured in to her employer demanding accountability. Her face, now familiar from the videos, became a symbol of racial bias gone unchecked. Within 2 days, her company released a statement publicly condemning her actions and terminated her employment. But the fallout didn't stop there. As public pressure mounted, the city attorney's office announced that Susan would be charged with filing a false police report and assaulting a minor. The charges sent a clear message. Being afraid wasn't an excuse for lying, and causing harm under the mask of concern wouldn't be tolerated. Her mugshot, shared by every major outlet, didn't carry the same defiance as her voice had in the park. It carried something else. Shock, disbelief, maybe the early weight of accountability. Officer Daniels was also placed under investigation. His immediate suspension was announced with little fanfare, but it sparked just as many conversations as Susan's arrest. People wanted to know how many times something like this had happened before, How often officers had responded with hostility first and questions second. More stories started coming forward, old complaints, ignored warnings, patterns of behavior. And Officer Harris, who had hesitated that day but said nothing, finally stepped forward with a statement of his own. He admitted to his own inaction. Said he saw the signs. Said he should have intervened. All of this played out in public. Town halls overflowed. Schools held discussions in classrooms. Neighborhoods organized vigils and forums. Camille remained at the center of it all, calm, resolute, and unwavering. She didn't ask the city to forget. She asked them to look, really look, and ask how it got this far. And Elijah, though still quiet, became a voice people listened to. Not because he shouted, but because he had survived something unjust and stood tall through it. The fallout was heavy, but so was the clarity. No one could claim this was just a misunderstanding. It had become a reckoning. One woman's lie had cracked something wide open, and a boy who just wanted to draw beneath a tree had unintentionally sparked a movement his city couldn't ignore. Elijah never wanted to be the center of attention. He liked the quiet, the background, the places where he could think without interruption. But after the park, after the sirens and the shouting and the videos that went viral, there was no hiding. His name was in headlines. His face was on screens. Teachers looked at him differently. Classmates whispered when he walked past. Everyone seemed to have something to say, some opinion about what had happened, even if they hadn't been there to see it for themselves. At first, he just wanted it all to go away. He stopped sketching for a while, kept his head down at school, tried to shrink the space he took up. His mom noticed. Camille Brooks may have been the mayor to everyone else, but at home, she was just mom. She reminded him gently that while he didn't choose this attention, he still had a choice in what came next. He didn't have to perform or prove anything to anyone, but if he wanted to speak, if he had something to say, people were ready to listen. So, Elijah decided to speak. Not right away, and not with flashy slogans or social media posts. It started with a letter. A simple, handwritten note he shared with his school principal, explaining what the experience had felt like from his side. How terrifying it had been to feel invisible and hypervisible all at once. How strange it was to be labeled dangerous when all he had ever wanted was to feel safe. The principal asked if Elijah would consider reading it aloud at the next school assembly. Elijah said yes, though his hands shook when he practiced. The day came, and the auditorium was full. Students, teachers, and staff sat shoulder to shoulder, most of them silent, some curious, others visibly unsure. Elijah walked onto the stage with his letter folded neatly in one hand, his other hand curled into a fist inside his hoodie pocket. He cleared his throat and started reading. His voice trembled at first, but with each sentence, it grew stronger. He didn't speak with anger. He didn't try to shame anyone. He just told the truth. He talked about the tree in the park and what it meant to him. He talked about fear and confusion and the way people looked at him that day, like he was already guilty. He talked about how easy it was for a lie to grow when no one questions it, and how silence from people who knew better could be just as loud as shouting. When he finished, there was a long pause, then a wave of applause that started slow and swelled into something full. Students stood up. Teachers wiped their eyes. And Elijah stepped off the stage a little taller than he had walked on. From there, everything moved quickly. Local community leaders asked him to speak at city forums. Youth organizers invited him to join conversations about reform and safety. He became a founding member of the city's new Youth Civic Council, a program Camille had pushed forward to make sure young people had real seats at the table. Elijah sat in rooms with officers, city officials, and policymakers. At first, he didn't say much. But when he did, everyone leaned in. He shared what safety actually felt like to someone his age. He explained how a park bench can be a place of peace or fear depending on who's watching you. He talked about the power of being believed and the cost of being ignored. The adults in those meetings didn't always know how to respond. Some were defensive, some humbled, most just quiet. But Elijah didn't need them to have answers. He just needed them to listen. He also returned to his art. His sketchbook filled again, only now, the cities he imagined weren't just floating in space. They had parks with open spaces, benches facing each other, community centers with bright murals, and safe corners for kids who like to sit alone and dream. His drawings started appearing in presentations and on posters around the city. Not as decoration, but as vision. Elijah hadn't planned to become a symbol of anything. But when the world handed him a microphone, he used it the way he knew best, with honesty, calm, and a voice that didn't have to be loud to be powerful. In doing so, he gave his city something it hadn't had in a long time. Hope, not just for justice, but for something better. Something that could last. Elijah Brooks still went back to that park sometimes. Not every week, and not always to sit under the willow tree, but enough to remind himself that it hadn't been taken from him. The tree was still there, its branches still low and sweeping, its shadow still dancing over the grass when the wind blew just right. For a while, just being near it brought back too much. The panic, the weight of suspicion, the feeling of standing in the center of something he didn't cause but couldn't escape. But over time, the fear softened. Not because he forgot, but because he grew. What had happened to him didn't shrink with time, but it stopped being the whole story. It became a beginning instead of an ending. The city had changed since that day. People talked differently. Teachers asked better questions. Neighbors who'd once been strangers now stopped to check in, to thank him, to tell him they were proud. They didn't always say the right things, but Elijah understood. Most were still learning how to talk about things that had been ignored for too long. And even though some moments still felt heavy, there was a new sense of movement. Something had shifted. Not perfectly, not quickly, but undeniably. Mayor Camille Brooks never stopped pushing. She met with city council members late into the night. She stood firm through opposition, through legal noise, and political games. The reforms she set in motion after the incident at the park became law. The Community Integrity and Equity Plan rolled out in phases, starting with training for every public employee, then introducing independent complaint boards and youth-led advisory councils. For the first time, kids like Elijah were not only being heard, they were helping shape policy. Elijah didn't speak at every event or answer every interview request. He chose when and how to use his voice, and people respected that. At school, he was still the kid who liked to draw, still soft-spoken in class, still more comfortable with ideas than attention. But when he did speak, whether in a meeting, a town hall, or even just a small classroom circle, people listened. Not because he shouted, but because there was weight behind his words. He had lived something that others had only read about. And he hadn't let it harden him. That mattered. He spent afternoons mentoring younger kids through a new youth justice program started by the city. Sometimes they talked about what happened in the park. Other times, they just sketched. They drew places that felt safe, dreamed up cities where no one had to explain why they were sitting alone under a tree. Elijah would look over their shoulders and smile, offering tips or just listening quietly. That, more than any award or headline, became the part of his journey he valued most, the chance to help someone else feel seen. One day, his mother found him at the kitchen table, working on a drawing that had taken over 3 full pages of his sketchbook. It was a community center, open, filled with natural light, with signs in multiple languages and murals by local artists. At the entrance, he had drawn a figure standing tall, hand raised, not in warning but in welcome. Camille sat beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. Neither of them said much. They didn't need to. The trial had come and gone. Susan Aldridge had been convicted, her lies laid bare in front of a courtroom. Officer Daniels had been removed from duty, a formal investigation bringing to light years of complaints that had gone unaddressed. Those outcomes didn't erase what happened. They didn't make Elijah forget the fear. But they did something important. They told him and every other kid watching that justice wasn't just a word grown-ups threw around. It could mean something real. What happened beneath the willow tree started a chain reaction. But it was Elijah's strength, his quiet honesty, and the love surrounding him that turned trauma into transformation. He hadn't set out to change his city. He just wanted to read a book and draw in peace. Yet from that small, ordinary hope came something extraordinary. And maybe that's how real change begins. Not always with loud protests or sweeping declarations, but with one person refusing to shrink. With one voice refusing to disappear. Elijah Brooks never asked to become a symbol, but in choosing to stand, he helped a whole city rise. There are moments in life when doing the right thing isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, and deeply courageous. Elijah's story reminds us that dignity doesn't require a stage, and strength doesn't always look like defiance. Sometimes, it looks like staying calm while the world misunderstands you. It's a lesson in patience, resilience, and the importance of truth, even when it feels like no one's listening. For older audiences, it's a powerful reminder that silence in the face of injustice is a choice, and so is speaking up. Whether as parents, grandparents, neighbors, or mentors, we all carry the responsibility to look out for those who don't yet have the power to defend themselves. Justice isn't just a legal matter. It begins in everyday interactions, in how we treat others, how we question assumptions, and how we choose compassion over fear. And when someone dares to tell the truth, no matter how softly, it's on us to listen, because change often begins with the quiet ones. If Elijah could stand tall at 13, imagine what we can do at 60. Let us know in the comments. What part of this story spoke to you most? What would you like us to cover in the next video? Don't forget to like this video if it moved you. And hit subscribe so you never miss more powerful, real-life stories that matter.